This mini webinar on note-taking for research is brought to you by Maryland Humanities for the Teaching with Primary Sources Summer Teacher Institute. Hi, this is Leah, and in this mini webinar, I'll be talking about how to take effective notes while doing research. Taking effective notes can make the project come together more smoothly when your students get to the writing part of the project. In this video, I'll share a possible strategy for note-taking for the History Day project. The topic we'll be taking notes on is the Alaska Purchase, when the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia in 1867. This connects well with the NHD theme because it was a diplomatic negotiation between the U.S. and Russia that sparked debate among legislators, the press, and other nations. And this topic can be explored in our ThinkPort Inquiry Kit, The United States Buys Alaska, which is in Unit 4 of our World History Kit. The kit includes the U.S.'s treaty with Russia, an open letter from the Commissioner of the General Land Office in favor of the purchase, a newspaper article, and more. In any research project, it's important to start with a research question. The research question will keep your students focused on something more specific about the event. It will encourage them to look at materials with an analytical eye and think about what viewpoints are being expressed rather than just collecting factual information. And it'll guide your students toward a clear, specific argument rather than an encyclopedia entry. Sub-questions will support that bigger research question. Long documents can be overwhelming for students, so it might be comforting to know that they don't need to take notes on every paragraph or every page. The most important info is the info that will help them answer their research questions. It's also good to know what parts of the story you'll be expected to tell. The NHG rubrics include criteria on providing historical context, which can include the short and long-term causes of an event, and short-term and long-term impacts, in addition to telling the main story. Having these project sections in your mind will help you understand if information is valuable to you and where it will go in your project. Let's take a look at a document so we can take some notes. This is the US's treaty with Russia, and this is one of the sources in that inquiry kit. This is the official document that made the purchase of Alaska legal. And zooming in on the first section, we'll take a look at the second paragraph. It says, "The United States of America and His Majesty the Emperor of all the Russias, being desirous of strengthening, if possible, the good understanding which exists between them, have, for that purpose, appointed as their plenipotentiaries," and it goes on to list the plenipotentiaries as William Seward from the U.S. and Edward de Stickel from Russia. And and since we see the word plenipotentiary a few times, we can look that up in the dictionary, and we know that it's a diplomat who has the authority to make decisions on behalf of their country. But I'm most interested in this phrase, being desirous of strengthening the good understanding which exists between them, because it hints at a positive diplomatic relationship between the two countries. So I am going to put that phrase in my notes. And you can see here, I have my notes file in Google Docs, so it saves automatically, and so I can share it with my group mates. I've included the name of the document in the first column, and I've linked to the web page it's on so I can easily find it again. I have the quote in the middle column, and in the third column, I've added that this note might help us in the context section of the project. But as much as this quote is telling us something about the relationship between the US and Russia, it's not telling us anything concrete. We don't know what diplomatic efforts brought them to this agreement or in what ways this agreement might strengthen their relationship. So I've added a question here. What does this mean exactly? These two things that I've added represent two different types of notes you might make. The first is a direct quote. For if you find a phrase or sentence in a primary source that seems to perfectly sum up something you want to say, or where you think the original language is important for conveying the meaning. You can use direct quotes in your project as evidence to support your claims, or use standalone block quotes for visual interest. The second is, of course, a question. If you read something and it leads you to a new question, write it down. You might find that the question is important enough to do more research on. Your research sub-questions will always be growing because the more you learn, the more you'll find you don't know yet. Back to the document, and Article 1 seems to be detailing the geographical boundaries of the territory. It's very long, and it probably won't help me answer my research question. So what we'll do is skim. If you skim and it all looks important, go back and read the full document. If not, skim until you land on something that will help you answer your questions. If a paragraph isn't relevant to you, you have permission to skip it. Here I'm skimming and they're talking lots and lots about degrees of latitude and longitude and geographical features. So we are going to skip this section. We'll look at one more passage to take notes from. This is Article 3, and we can see in the margins that it's about the rights of the inhabitants of the ceded territory. It says that the inhabitants of the ceded territory may return to Russia within 3 years, but if they choose to stay, they, with the exception of uncivilized native tribes, shall be admitted to the enjoyment of all the rights, advantages, and immunities of citizens of the United States, and shall be maintained and protected in the free enjoyment of their liberty, property, and religion. In other words, the Russian people occupying Alaska will be eligible to become citizens and to have the rights that come with that, but the Alaska Natives, like Native Americans in the contiguous states at that time, would not be. Since this is about an impact on people, this seems like an important part of the story. So I'll add it to my notes. Alaska Natives not made citizens, and this might help me understand the short-term impacts of the purchase. And it gets me thinking about how this detail fits my story about diplomacy. And really, it shows how diplomacy does not work for everyone. People affected by diplomatic efforts might not even factor into the debates about it. So I've added a note explaining my thoughts about what this source reveals as well. Alaska Natives left out of diplomatic efforts. These represent two new types of notes. The first is a paraphrase, where you write what you've just read or heard in your own words. This is important for avoiding plagiarism, and likely most of your notes on secondary sources will be paraphrases. And second, we've got an example of analysis. This isn't what the source says directly, but I've interpreted what I read and given my thoughts about how it fits into the story. I hope you found these tips useful. Thanks for watching and good luck digging for sources.